morning, dear students of class 8. In your online English class, today we are going to take up the lesson Selfish Giant Part 2. Let us quickly recapitulate the first part, which you have already studied, The Selfish Giant by the famous writer Oscar Wilde. In the first part, we studied about the giant's garden, which was very beautiful, and that is why children loved to play in his garden. As the giant was away, the children were free to enjoy in his garden. But after 7 years, when the giant returned back home, as he had gone to his friend, and now after 7 years he returned back home. He became very angry. He shooed away the children and he decided to build a wall. And he also put up a notice that trespassing is not allowed. So nobody dared to enter his garden. This made the children very sad. And children, why he did all this? Because he was a selfish giant. Now let us read the lesson further. The giant's garden was no longer beautiful. The spring came, and all over the country there were flowers, there were blossoms, and little birds were chirping with happiness. But only in the garden of the selfish giant, it was still winter. Seasons did not change. The birds did not care to sing in his garden as there were no children, and even the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower just put up its head from the grass. But when he saw in the notice board that trespassing was not allowed and nobody could enter his garden, it was so sorry for the children that the flower decided to slip again into the ground and went off to sleep. So his garden was no longer beautiful. Now, in his garden there was always snow and frost. The only people who were pleased were snow and frost. Spring had forgotten to come to his garden, and snow and frost said that we are going to live in this garden all the year round. The snow covered up the grass with a great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. You can see in the picture. Then they also invited the north wind to stay with them. And north wind also came. So snow, frost and north wind made his garden a really bad place where there was always winter, there was no spring, no flowers. Every day for 3 hours, the north wind rattled on the roof of the castle and almost broke most of the slates. And always he was dressed in grey and his breath was like ice. So his garden was no longer a beautiful place to live in. Now, the giant used to wonder why spring is so late in my garden. You can see the giant in the picture peeping out of his window and just wondering, I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming. As he sat at the window and looked out at his cold white garden, he hoped, I hope there will be a change in the weather. He wanted spring to come. But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruits to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and hail and frost and snow. Now, one day he saw a wonderful sight. You can see him peeping out of his window. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. There was a small hole in the wall, and through this hole the children had all entered his garden quietly, and they were sitting on the branches of the trees. In every tree he could see there was a little child. And the trees were so glad to have the children back that they covered themselves with blossoms. And they were waving their arms gently above the children's head. Even the birds were flying about and twittering with delight. The flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. So was it not a beautiful sight? Yes. And who had made it a beautiful sight? The entry of small children. And the selfish giant was peeping outside from his window, and he was also admiring this wonderful sight, because never earlier he had seen his garden like this. There was always frost, snow, north wind in his garden. Now change in the giant. There was only in one corner of his garden where there was winter. Otherwise the entire garden was full of spring, and it was farthest corner of the garden. Very far in a corner of the garden. And in it was standing a little boy, a very small boy. He was so small that he could not reach up to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all around it, and he was crying bitterly. He was crying badly. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could. But the little boy was too tiny. He was not able to climb onto the tree. And the giant's heart melted seeing this scene as he looked out. "How selfish I have been," he said. "Now I know why the spring would not come here. I'll put that little boy on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever." So standing there was a realization in the giant that he was very selfish. And he took 3 decisions. 1, to go and help the little boy climb onto the tree. And the second thing that he would do was break the wall. And the third thing that he was going to do was to allow all the children to play in his garden. But when the giant entered the garden, the children saw him. They were very frightened, and they all ran away, and once again the garden became winter. The giant's behavior changed. There was only this little boy who could not run, and his eyes were so full of tears. He did not see the giant coming. The giant came close to the child and took him gently in his hand, and he put him onto the tree. And as he put him onto the tree broke up at once into blossoms, and the birds came and sang on it. And the little boy also stretched out his 2 arms and flung them round the giant's neck and kissed him. So the giant was kind, and the child showed his love for the giant by kissing him. Now, we see that seeing this scene, what did the other children do? The other children, they saw the giant was now not wicked any longer. And they came running back. And as they came running to the garden, the spring came. The giant said, "It is your garden now, little children." And he took a big axe, and he knocked down the wall. And when the people were going to the market at 12 o'clock, they found that the giant was playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. So you can see in the picture the giant and his beautiful garden and beautiful children surrounding him and playing. You can see the giant was no longer selfish. There is a smile on his face and he is enjoying playing with the children. So let us recapitulate the part which we did today, part 2, Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. So Giant's garden was no longer beautiful. Once it was beautiful, but because he did not allow the children, it was no longer beautiful. So Giant was sad. But one day he saw a wonderful sight. He saw there is spring in his garden, which he was waiting for, because always in his garden there was snow, frost and north wind. What did he see? The children had come to his garden, and because of the entry of children, the garden was beautiful. This brought a change in the giant, and the giant decided to break the wall, and children were allowed inside his garden. They were happy. The giant from selfish giant became a very kind giant, and his garden was once again beautiful. I hope you all have understood this lesson, the second part, and tomorrow we are going to take the third part. Read your books, the lesson, and revise, write down the important points of part 2 in your notebooks. That's all for your English class today. Have a nice day. Thank you.